It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for being gracious with the invitation that Reverend Sherry offered to change pulpits. Just to share with you, it was pages of notes about what she loved about you. It's a lovely opportunity to reflect some of that back to you in this message. Our Unitarian Universalist principles are intertwined with constructs of trust. The threads that run through are affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence. Those might sound familiar. It's what drew me to this amazing faith that we have, Unitarian Universalism. Trust is a spiritual, individual, and community issue. And trust is the foundation of what nations, faith communities, and families are built on or shattered by. These UU principles rose up to the surface for me as I listened recently to Brené Brown's Super Soul session on Anatomy of Trust online. She described the story of her daughter Ellen, who arrived home from school one day, and just as the door to the home closed, she collapsed on the floor in a puddle of tears. She was distraught. She explained to her mom what was wrong. During recess, she had shared with two of her friends something that was really hard that had happened at school. And by the time she reached the class again, the whole class was laughing and pointing and calling her names. Everyone in the class had known what had happened to her, that she had shared with these two friends. The teacher didn't have a clue what was going on, but had this system, this marble system that you took part in during the Time for All Ages, that when the class worked as a team and contributed to the functioning of the class, marbles went in. But when things went wrong, marbles came out. So she was scooping marbles out until the class finally settled down. I don't know if the teacher ever did figure out what had happened that day, but Ellen continued to talk to her mom about the incident. And finally, when the story was over, Ellen looked at Brené and said, "I will never trust anybody ever again." Have you ever felt that way? If I think back on my life, I might have felt that way once or twice when I experienced a breach of trust, before I knew there was a mending that could happen. Wanting to talk to Ellen about trust, Brené continued with her, and she used that example of marbles. She explained that perhaps when we choose to trust somebody, it needs to be somebody who's filled a jar with trustworthy events, a jar that's full of marbles. Event after small event goes into the jar, and eventually we learn that person is a trustworthy person. I can share that thing that happened that was so hard. I can share that vulnerable thing with the person who has filled that jar. And so Brené went on and said, what kinds of things or friends, do you have any friends who have filled marbles of jars? And Ellen says, I have a couple of friends who are full jar people. And so curiously, Brené says, well, what were they? What did they do? And Ellen responded, well, at lunchtime when there's no seats, one of them will scooch over and let me share their seat. Oh, that's a very trustworthy thing. Are there any other things that have happened? And Ellen explained that when she was playing sports one day, Brene thought, oh no, this has got to be about like some big crash on the field. But it wasn't. Ellen said, I have a friend who was able to tell me, hey, your grandparent is here, and name that grandparent. Now, Ellen had 8 grandparents, so that was impressive, that her friend knew the name of this one grandparent who had showed up to the game. That was a trustworthy marble event. And so this conversation unfolded about trust being earned over time by small events and interchanges over and over again. That was the lesson from parent to child. And I think it has something to offer to us as congregations, as communities of faith. What is it like for you when you trust someone or some group of people? What did it take for you to fill their marble jar of trust? Are there trust-building experiences for you that happened here? That happened out in your greater life? There are also, I'm sure, trust-breaking experiences that happen for all of us. As surely as we wake up breathing, it's going to happen. I'm betting most of us carry at least some of these with us into new relationships, whether we realize it or not. Some experiences I carry into my ministry that have to do with trust are built from my circle of care, a group of people that I get together with monthly from seminary, and we share in this open, caring, non-judgmental space what's going well and what's not going so well. Things that we're proud of in our ministry and things that include our mistakes. I carry those into other experiences. I also carry times when I catch myself full of hope and anticipation, forgetting that trust takes time to build up a full marble jar. Like Ellen, sometimes I don't wait until the jar is full before I place my trust. I've learned there are no shortcuts, however. It's much better to realize it takes time, and it takes an interchange, and it takes noticing. Trust impacts us individually, socially, politically. It impacts every part of our lives. Just as Ellen experienced, trust and breaches of trust leave imprints on individuals and communities. Here is the marble of just, full of trust for West Side UU Church. Your blessings of trust are here, and I imagine that it really could be filled quite high. That some of the things you mentioned, being a welcoming community, all are welcome. All are welcome. Deserves more than one each. There was a lot of work that happened here to create that environment. Trust about being trusted, finding a home in the local synagogue while you rebuilt. For Alice, Chloe, and James, and the awesome children that are here in this congregation, both today and other days and other times. Grateful for OWL, for money that is helping the Pathways organization and other organizations that you donate to. For the children and adult environment of learning. The many ways that you are fed spiritually, intellectually, and emotionally. Your new member welcome spirit the hot, strong coffee that you find here on Sunday morning, and the great plans that started 45 years ago and turned into this amazing place that continues to keep changing. You are building on this work of trust, this amazing work of trust. And coming up on your 25th anniversary, West Side being just a few years old, from 45 members, growing to nearly 200 now, is amazing. It's a testament, really, of the fact that you have done what Brené Brown describes as braving connection. And she describes this breakdown of the anatomy of trust this way. And she's used braving as kind of a code word. B is for boundaries. It's important to be clear and consistent. R is for reliability, following through, and consistency. To do this, she says, we must be clear about our own limits. A, accountability. When I make a mistake, acknowledge and make amends. V is for vault. What I share with you, you will hold in confidence, and vice versa. And when gossip happens, it's a minus of marbles from that trust jar. It's a minus from the person receiving it and the person giving it. I is for integrity, choosing courage over comfort, choosing what is right instead of what is easy. And for non-judgment, being willing to ask for help and offer help, being willing to be vulnerable. G for generosity, as you've shown today in your giving, and as you've shown in many ways, as you give your talent and your time and your willingness to be in relationship with each other. Brown is clear that trust is built in these small moments, not grand gestures. So sometimes we need perhaps an attention to finding it, to noticing it, and recalling it. Our memories are impacted by these. Where are the places that you can build on the braving that's already happening? What will you add to the jar over time? Part of any growing community's work is clarification of the boundaries that Brené Brown described earlier, looking at what the roles of shared ministry are as it relates to professional ministry, as the roles of your committees and teams, your lay members, your wonderful ability to invite newer people into leadership so that you're ever changing. As you welcome people, things will change, new ideas. Reliability of following through is required for the health of all faith communities. UU minister Eric Wickstrom, in his book, Serving with Grace, Leadership as Spiritual Practice, talks about the importance of supporting the answer no. Now, the asker may not be all that excited to hear your no, but it is a sacred opportunity to acknowledge our limits. He notes one of the great contributing factors to leader burnout is doing too much. And so we can reduce this by welcoming this spiritual practice. In just 6 months since I've been at Denton, it's required me to revisit that message, that spiritual practice, that no, I can't attend every meeting every week and still have enough energy to do the other aspects of ministry. And so I don't know about you, but I just keep on bumping up into new opportunities to relearn these lessons. Trusting is the interdependent web, though, that piece of our faith and our principles that says, I'm not the only one that needs to do this thing. it leaves room for someone new. It leaves room for new leadership. It leaves room for developing skills. It leaves room to move away from, well, this is how we always do it here. Perhaps you've never fallen to that aspect of community life, but if you haven't, bravo, it would be unique to your congregation, because in my travels over the last probably nearly 20 years doing some consulting work throughout the Northeast for the UUA, it's not an uncommon message that I hear as a consultant coming in. We don't do that here, Donna. Accountability sounds easy, and it can be easy to admit that we've made mistakes, or it can be a little challenging and uncomfortable. It was one of these stories, these uncomfortable stories that came to mind for me, was early in my social work career when I was very shiny still. I was doing home care and driving to house, and occasionally I would be late, having misjudged my travel time or the time that it took. And so I was late arriving to this home out in the country. And the first thing the person said to me is, you're 20 minutes late. By golly, she was right. But that's not where I went first. Where I went first was a whole stream of justification, of an effort to deny the discomfort that I had broken our covenant by being late and not notifying her. I had not been in relation with your behavioral covenant. I had shut down and missed an opportunity to be accountable to the impact of my mistake. Now, that's just a small individual example, and you have a beautiful example of doing this accountability thing in the right direction. Reverend Sherry shared with me that you are accountable to this work of breaking down systems of white supremacy, looking at that from internally. And that work is so important, being accountable to how we are, how our systems are in the greater world. This accountability that you have committed to is rippling into your experiences with RE, with worship, with your financial pledge to Black Lives UU. This is one more exciting aspect to your congregation. And continuing on in this, braving is vault, keeping what shared with you in confidence. I like to think of it as in a community that we're just going to do direct communication. I'll just come to you if I have a problem, and I'll expect that you'll hear me out. And if you have a problem with me, that you can come to me directly, and I'll hear you out. It's understanding that we each bring a different perception to the table. It's part of the beauty of diversity. It's part of the beauty of being in right relation, that we get to build a deeper relationship with each other by being vulnerable. And integrity, continuing to extend ourselves beyond our comfort zone, doing that justice work that your committee that offers coffee hour today is inviting you into. When we examine what our discomfort is about, it's an opportunity for transformation. Non-judgment paves the way to acceptance of one another and encouragement of spiritual growth. The beauty of our UU faith is enriched by our ability to offer this non-judgmental stance. It roots what filled some of this jar, this welcome that got mentioned 3 times in a row, and then what mentioned again as a connection to new people. This congregation, this community, our United States is enriched by our great differences, no matter what we are told through the news. And last but not least, generosity, building on the best intentions. During this time in history when our political rhetoric is one filled with fear and an opportunity to build division, assuming the best intention offers a way of being in relationship that's built on love. What you have here is evident. It's evident to your minister. And she had a great joy in sharing that with me. It's evident in your covenant, which reflects this braving that you do that's up on your wall, that reads, "We covenant to build a religious community guided by compassion and sustained by respectful relationship, believing that building healthy relationships is a spiritual practice. We aim to listen appreciatively, speak with care, express gratitude, appreciate our differences, and assume good intentions. We endeavor to communicate directly, honestly, and thoughtfully. When we hurt one another, we will actively seek reconciliation, make amends, and reconnect to that spirit of love. We strive to build and sustain our community by sharing minds, hearts, and helping hands. Thus we do covenant with one another. You are braving connections into the future. What will you do as your next braving act?